The Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association was infamous among its residents. It was not just a committee of volunteers, it was a small empire. The board, led by President Richard Holbrook, enjoyed absolute authority over everything from the color of mailboxes to the types of flowers people could plant in their front yards. The residents lived in constant fear of receiving one of the dreaded yellow envelopes. A fine notice slipped neatly into their mail slot. One family had been fined $500 for leaving their trash cans out an extra hour. Another had been penalized for painting their shutters a shade darker than the approved neighborhood palette. Even children's toys left in the yard could lead to punishment. At monthly meetings, the board sat on a raised platform like royalty, handing down judgments with smug smiles. Richard, tall and sharp-faced, always leaned back in his chair as if he owned the neighborhood. Beside him sat Denise, the vice president, whose sharp tongue could cut through any resident who dared to question their authority. For years, no one had challenged them. People grumbled behind closed doors. But when faced with threats of liens or foreclosure, they always paid. The HOA thrived on fear. One bright spring morning, a moving truck rolled into Maplewood Heights. From it stepped a woman named Evelyn Carter. She was in her late 40s, graceful, with a quiet presence that drew attention without demanding it. She wore simple clothes, jeans, boots, and a leather jacket that had clearly seen years of use. A hunting dog, a German short-haired pointer named Duke, hopped out of the truck and trotted beside her with obedient confidence. Evelyn had recently purchased one of the larger homes at the edge of the development, bordering a stretch of woods. Unlike other newcomers, she did not rush to introduce herself, nor did she decorate her lawn with colorful flowers or seasonal banners. She kept to herself, spending much of her time in the woods with Duke. Neighbors occasionally saw her returning in the evenings with her hunting gear, a bow slung across her back or a rifle in its case. She always carried herself with dignity, never boastful, never secretive, but her independence unsettled the tight-knit, rule-obsessed neighborhood. Rumors began to spread. "She hunts," whispered one resident at the community mailbox. "Dangerous, if you ask me. I heard she keeps animal trophies. Richard will never allow this." The HOA wasted no time. Within weeks of her arrival, Evelyn received her first yellow envelope. Violation notice. 10-17. Unapproved activity on premises. Hunting. Possession of prohibited equipment. And disturbance of community aesthetics. Fine imposed, $2,500. The letter was signed with flourish by Richard himself. Most new residents would have been terrified. A fine that steep could escalate into liens, lawsuits, even foreclosure. But Evelyn simply read the notice, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer without a word. When her neighbor, Mrs. Turner, asked nervously what she would do, Evelyn smiled gently. "They are free to write letters," she said, "but whether I choose to obey them is another matter entirely." Word spread quickly. Evelyn Carter had ignored the HOA fine. No one had ever dared before. At the next HOA meeting, Richard announced her defiance with relish. "She thinks she is above the rules," he sneered, waving a copy of the unpaid notice. "We cannot allow rebellion. If we do not crush it, others will follow." The board members nodded in agreement. They prepared to escalate the matter, confident that they would break her spirit just as they had broken so many others before. But Evelyn was not like anyone they had ever faced. When Evelyn Carter moved into Maplewood Heights, she seemed like just another resident looking for peace and quiet. But beneath her calm smile was a woman who had lived through storms far greater than any HOA could conjure. She was a widow. Her late husband, Daniel Carter, had been a decorated military officer and a sharp investor. Together, they had built a fortune not through showy luxury, but through careful choices and patience. Daniel's passing had left Evelyn with more than wealth. It had left her with a resolve as solid as steel. For years, she had traveled between cities, managing properties and land her husband had left behind. She rarely stayed in one place long, until she saw Maplewood Heights. The neighborhood was beautiful, winding streets lined with oak trees, elegant homes with manicured lawns, and a lake that reflected the sky like glass. But Evelyn had not chosen Maplewood Heights for its scenery. She had chosen it because of its history. The land once belonged to her family generations ago, lost during hard times. Through patient legal maneuvering and investment, she had quietly reacquired much of the surrounding property over the years. The residents of Maplewood Heights had no idea that the ground beneath their feet still carried her family's legacy. To Evelyn, moving into the neighborhood was not just about a home. It was about watching over what was hers. Silently, Her independence unsettled the HOA because she did not flinch at their rules. She mowed her lawn when she pleased, not on their scheduled, approved days. She decorated her porch with rustic hunting lanterns instead of the HOA-mandated flower pots. She greeted neighbors warmly, but when they probed too much into her life, she politely but firmly ended the conversation. She was kind, but she was not pliable. One evening, an elderly neighbor named Mr. Alvarez stopped by while she was oiling her hunting rifle on the porch. He nervously asked, "Aren't you afraid the HOA will come after you for that?" Evelyn looked up, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. "Fear is how they control people," she said softly. "But I have seen worse tyrants than Richard Halbrook, and I know how they all end." Mr. Alvarez chuckled nervously, unsure whether she was joking, but something in her voice told him she was not a woman to be underestimated. At the next board meeting, Denise leaned toward Richard. "She is not like the others," she whispered. "She does not scare easily," Richard smirked. "Then we will make her afraid. Everyone breaks eventually." But even as he spoke with arrogance, there was something in the back of his mind, a gnawing thought. Evelyn Carter was different. Her refusal to pay, her calmness in the face of threats, her quiet dignity, it all suggested that she knew something he did not. What Richard could not imagine, what no one yet realized, was that Evelyn was not the hunted in this story. She was the hunter, watching patiently, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. The yellow fine notice sat unanswered in Evelyn Carter's drawer, gathering dust. Weeks passed, and she made no attempt to pay. To Richard Halbrook, this was unforgivable. At the next HOA board meeting, Richard slammed his fist on the polished oak table. "She refuses to acknowledge us," he growled. "If one resident ignores the rules, they all will. Our authority will collapse." Denise, ever sharp-tongued, leaned forward. "She thinks she can intimidate us with her silence. We must strike harder. Issue another fine. Double it. Make her regret this," the board agreed unanimously. By the end of the week, Evelyn received violation notice, #129, failure to comply with previously issued fine. Additional penalty imposed, $5,000, threat of legal action pending. This time, Richard made sure it was hand-delivered. He stood on her porch, dressed in his immaculate suit, as if he were a judge passing sentence. Evelyn opened the door calmly, Duke at her side. Richard handed her the envelope with a smug smile. "You have 1 week," he said. "Pay this fine, or we will take further action. You do not want to test us." Evelyn met his gaze, her expression steady. "Do not mistake silence for weakness, Mr. Halbrook," she replied softly. "Some storms do not roar until the right moment." Richard's smile faltered for a brief second, but his pride forced him to scoff. He turned on his heel and marched away, muttering, "Arrogant woman." Most residents would have panicked, but Evelyn continued her life as if nothing had happened. She walked Duke in the evenings, her footsteps steady and unhurried. She worked quietly in her garden, trimming roses and reading on her porch while neighbors watched in awe. At the grocery store, Mrs. Turner approached her nervously. "Evelyn, they're saying the HOA might put a lien on your house, that they could even take it from you." Evelyn placed a loaf of bread in her cart, her expression serene. "They cannot take what was never theirs," she said simply. The neighbors exchanged puzzled looks. What did she mean by that? Meanwhile, at board meetings, Evelyn began attending quietly. She would sit in the back row listening while Richard and Denise barked orders and imposed fines on others. She never spoke, never protested, just observed. Her calm presence was unnerving. One evening after a meeting, Denise whispered to Richard, "She is plotting something. I can feel it. The way she watches us. It's like she knows more than she lets on." Richard scoffed, though unease tugged at him. "She is bluffing. We'll crush her just like the rest." The HOA grew bolder, determined to make an example of Evelyn. They sent threats of foreclosure, claiming her unpaid fines justified seizing her property. They publicly listed her name in the community bulletin under non-compliant residents. Denise even mocked her at a meeting, saying, "Some people think they are above the law, but in Maplewood Heights, no one escapes the rules." Each new strike was meant to humiliate and isolate her, but instead, something strange began happening. The residents, long cowed into silence, started to watch Evelyn with quiet admiration. They had lived under Richard and Denise's tyranny for years. Now they saw someone standing tall, unafraid, while the HOA raged louder and louder. Mr. Alvarez, the elderly neighbor, whispered to his wife one evening, "Do you see her? She doesn't bend, not even a little. Maybe she's the one we've been waiting for." And still, Evelyn said nothing. She moved through the days with dignity, her silence like a shield. She was waiting, patiently, purposefully, for the moment when all would be revealed. The HOA board meeting that month was packed. Rumors had spread like wildfire. Evelyn Carter had refused every fine, ignored every threat, and still lived undisturbed in her home. Richard sat at the head of the table, his silver hair slicked back, his polished shoes tapping impatiently. Denise sat beside him, flipping through her papers with a smug smirk. They had prepared the ultimate punishment, a motion to begin foreclosure proceedings on Evelyn's property. When Evelyn entered the room, a hush fell. She carried a slim leather folder in her hand, her posture straight, her expression calm as ever. She took a seat in the front row, Duke lying obediently at her feet. Richard cleared his throat, his voice booming. "Residents of Maplewood Heights, we are here to discuss a matter of grave importance. Mrs. Carter has ignored repeated notices, refused to pay her fines, and defied this board's authority. Tonight we move forward with foreclosure." Gasps rippled through the audience. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one dared speak, except Evelyn. She rose slowly, her voice quiet yet firm. "Mr. Holbrook, before you proceed, I believe it is time I share something with this board, and with the community." Richard smirked. "Unless you've brought your checkbook, Mrs. Carter. I doubt there is anything worth hearing." But Evelyn's calm gaze silenced him. She opened her leather folder and pulled out a stack of documents, neatly bound and bearing official seals. Evelyn stepped forward, handing copies of the papers to the board members. Her voice was steady, but every word carried weight. "These are the property deeds for Maplewood Heights. Every street, every home, every patch of land in this community rests on a foundation of ownership. And that ownership," she tapped the documents, "belongs to me." The room went silent. Richard blinked, confused. Denise's smirk faltered. Evelyn continued. "My family owned this land long before Maplewood Heights was built. Decades ago, it was sold under financial strain. But over the years, through patience and persistence, I reacquired it. Quietly, legally, completely. This neighborhood, every inch of it, stands on my property." She looked directly at Richard. "You may run your meetings, issue your notices, and pretend to hold power. But you, Mr. Holbrook, and every member of this HOA are tenants. And I am your landlady." Gasps filled the room. Several residents turned to one another, whispering in disbelief. Richard's face flushed crimson. This is outrageous. "You expect us to believe?" Evelyn cut him off by pointing to the official seal of the county registrar on the documents. "Do not take my word for it. The records are public." "Check them yourself," Denise stammered, flipping through the papers, her hands trembling. The legal language was clear. Evelyn Carter was not only a homeowner, she was the ultimate authority over the land itself. The board sat frozen. Richard's lips moved soundlessly, struggling to form words. Denise's sharp tongue had gone silent for the first time in years. Then Evelyn delivered the final blow. "As the rightful landowner, I hereby dissolve the contract granting authority to this HOA. Effective immediately. Your rules, your fines, your threats, they are null and void. This board no longer exists." The room erupted. Some residents cheered, others cried tears of relief. For years, they had lived under Richard and Denise's iron fist, terrified of every yellow envelope. Now, with a single declaration, the chains had been broken. Richard slammed his fist on the table. "You cannot do this!" he shouted, his voice cracking. Evelyn met his fury with quiet steel. "I already have." She turned to the crowd. "From this day forward, you are free from their tyranny. No more unjust fines. No more petty rules. This neighborhood belongs to its people, not to a board drunk on power." The residents stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, shouting her name. Richard and Denise sat pale and humiliated, their empire crumbling around them. The days after the meeting were unlike anything Maplewood Heights had ever experienced. The HOA office, once buzzing with authority, stood dark and empty. The mailbox where residents had dreaded yellow envelopes now sat unused. Richard and Denise had vanished from public view, their power stripped and their pride shattered. Rumors spread quickly. Richard had resigned in disgrace, his corporate-like empire crumbled. Denise, humiliated, had packed up and left town, unable to face neighbors who now saw her for what she truly was, a petty tyrant. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. Families laughed more easily, children played without fear of fines, and neighbors gathered on porches to talk without worrying that Denise might be watching. The oppressive shadow that had loomed over Maplewood Heights had lifted. Evelyn, however, did not step into power with arrogance. She did not replace Richard and Denise with herself. Instead, she chose a different path. One evening, she invited the entire neighborhood to her home. Tables were set up on her lawn, covered with food, drinks, and warm lights strung from tree to tree. Families arrived cautiously at first, but soon the air was filled with laughter, conversation, and the smell of barbecue. When everyone had gathered, Evelyn stood before them. "I did not come here to rule," she said gently. "I came here because this land means something to me. My family once walked these fields. My husband and I dreamed of seeing communities thrive here. But what I witnessed was fear. People should not be afraid of their neighbors. They should live in trust, in peace, in support of one another." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "So, I will not create another board. Instead, I place this community in your hands. Be kind to each other. Help one another. If you want to organize for events or beautification, do so out of choice, not out of fear. From now on, Maplewood Heights belongs to its people." Tears glistened in Mrs. Turner's eyes. Mr. Alvarez raised his glass, and one by one the residents clapped, then cheered. Evelyn had not just freed them, she had given them dignity. A week later, Richard, red-faced and bitter, confronted Evelyn on her porch. He could not let go of his pride. "You humiliated me," he spat. "Everything I built, you tore it down." Evelyn looked at him calmly. "No, Richard. You humiliated yourself. You built nothing but fear, and fear always collapses when truth arrives." She turned away, leaving him speechless. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the neighborhood in golden light, Evelyn walked Duke along the street. Children waved to her, parents smiled, and neighbors who once avoided eye contact now greeted her warmly. For the first time, Maplewood Heights felt alive. Evelyn Carter, the woman once fined for hunting, had hunted something greater than game. She had hunted injustice, and in doing so, she had given an entire community the freedom to live again. The story closes with Evelyn not as a conqueror, but as a quiet liberator. Her strength was never about domination, but about restoring dignity and peace.